Geologists are saying we're living in new times, so new that they're thinking of changing the name of the geological phase in which we live. Welcome to Environment and welcome to what may soon be known as the Anthropocene, or the age of man. Coming up, global warming, rising sea levels and mass extinction of species. Have humans changed the planet to such an extent that we need to proclaim a new geological epoch? Next, the effect of our carbon emissions on the ocean. We head to Norway, where scientists have shown how soaring CO2 levels are acidifying the water and threatening marine life. And finally, surviving in the new epoch. Followers of the Mayan calendar say the world will end next year. They're among thousands of people investing in underground bunkers that can withstand virtually any natural or man-made catastrophe. The French Alps, home to some of the most impressive glaciers in the world. Glaciers that could shrink by up to 75% by the end of the century. A group of leading geologists are saying these changes to our environment are not only man-made, they're so long-lasting they've pushed us into a new age, one shaped primarily by man. They're calling this new epoch the Anthropocene. Jerome Chapelaz has no fear of the cold. Winter or summer, he spends much of his workday in this huge freezer. It's inside at a temperature of almost -30 degrees that he keeps his prized souvenirs. Ice samples drilled from trips to the poles, each one carefully numbered.
It's written on it. You see 101, drilled from 46 metres deep in Concordia in Antarctica. This ice is relatively recent.
Air bubbles are often trapped inside the ice. Jerome's job as a glaciologist is to evaluate the amount of greenhouse gas it contains. This sample here dates back 50 years.
Already at that time, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was much higher than 200 or 300 years ago, and therefore the impact of human activity was already measurable 50 years ago.
Those in favour of recognising man's footprint as a new geological epoch believe it began 200 years ago with the advent of the Industrial Revolution. For Jerome, the changing CO2 levels is just one piece of evidence that humans have begun to shape the Earth like never before.
I can't understand why the Anthropocene wouldn't be recognised as a new geological time. There's a loss of biodiversity, there's the impact of human activity on the climate and ocean acidification. All this leads us to believe we're in a completely different environment, and we can call it a new geological epoch.
An epoch is the smallest unit of time on a geological timescale, which includes much larger eras and periods, each one differentiated by a major event or change. For example, the dinosaurs disappeared 65 million years ago. Man came much later and is still young at less than 4 million years old. Recognising the Anthropocene would mean leaving the relatively stable Holocene epoch, which has existed for 11,000 years.
Lots of geologists believe the Anthropocene question is a political and sociological one. They say talking about a new geological epoch is a good way of raising environmental issues with the public. Is this really a geological issue now? If you look at the rocks, evolution takes millions of years.
The International Commission on Stratigraphy will have the final say. Its members will meet at a conference in Brisbane next year, where they'll decide whether man has become a force of nature, reshaping the planet on a geological scale. Man's interference in the carbon cycle has been blamed for the global warming that is believed to be behind the melting of these glaciers. But the impact of rising CO2 levels isn't bound to just one phenomenon. Researchers in Norway have been researching the acidifying effect on our oceans.
The icy waters around the Norwegian island of Spitsbergen are clean and clear, but they're facing an invisible threat. Soaring levels of CO2 over the past century are being absorbed by the world's oceans, making them more and more acidic and harming marine life. On a glacial fjord 1,200 kilometers from the North Pole, researchers are trying to better understand the phenomenon. They've plunged 9 gigantic tubes into the ocean, into which they inject CO2.
The idea is to enclose a large body of water with all the organisms in there. We will then acidify this according to the projections we have for the next 20, 40, 60 years and so on. And then we'll watch very closely how does the ecosystem, the Arctic ecosystem, respond to that.
Corals and mollusks form calcium shells during their lifetime. With this technique, scientists discovered that in acidic waters that happens much more slowly. The sea snail is a tiny mollusk that could lose its shell by the end of the century, a huge threat to marine biodiversity.
They are a key species for the Arctic food system because they are feeding on very small particles and on phytoplankton and small stuff, and they're getting quite big, and really big animals like whales and fish and birds can feed on them.
When these snails die, their shells harness all the CO2 ingested throughout their short lives, making them a valuable ally in the fight against global warming. An ally now in danger of being lost.
While geologists are debating whether we've entered the age of man, there's others who fear something much greater than a new epoch. Followers of the Mayan calendar believe that the world will end in December next year. There's at least one company in California offering a solution: post-apocalyptic bunkers that can accommodate 1,000 people underground for up to a year.
Nuclear meltdown, a natural disaster, or a collision with an asteroid. All reasons to fear that the end of the world could be just around the corner. Some think Armageddon may come as soon as next year. The 21st of December 2012 is the last day listed in the Mayan calendar. Doomsday shelters have been around since the 1950s, but after March's devastating earthquake and tsunami struck northern Japan, US manufacturers have had their sales rocket by up to 1,000%. For those who prefer to see out the apocalypse in luxury, there's Vivos. The company sells rooms in huge survival bunkers built to withstand a nuclear blast. It's the brainchild of entrepreneur Robert Vicino.
Vivos shelters are designed to accommodate thousands of people for up to 1 year of autonomous underground disconnection from the rest of the world. Now they've got everything from all the food, water, clothing, fuel, medical supplies, hygienic supplies, and everything that would be needed for daily activities to survive.
At around €35,000, this all doesn't come cheap for something that might never get used. But that hasn't stopped anxious clients from signing up in their droves. The company is also working on an economy class shelter, so for those with a smaller budget, it's not the end of the world.
Fortunately, for now, we are safe above ground. But that brings us to the end of Environment. Thanks for joining us here on France 24, and we'll see you next week.